So this is part 2 of our tutorial for Project 3 for Type 1. If you are coming to this video first, do not. Go back to your Part 1 for how to set up the document. I also want to mention that I have also linked to a basic tutorial for using the pen tool in Adobe Illustrator. That's actually from my graphic design concepts class, but I've linked to it on the class blog. So anyone who is completely new to Adobe Illustrator and vector art, you may find that tutorial and that worksheet very helpful as well, just to get you up to speed. Alright, so what we're going to do, we have our art layer, we have our scan layer. Alright. Our scan layer is locked. You can see there's this little padlock icon next to the scan layer. That means I cannot manipulate it. The eye is on. If I toggle that eye off, that layer becomes invisible. We're going to work in the art layer. So we click the art layer. That layer is highlighted. That means we can work in this top art layer. Some quick basics on the pen tool. This is the pen tool. It is a bit of a misnomer. It's a little tricky to learn how to use it first. And that is because it doesn't really work like a pen. It's actually more of a connect the dots tool. If you've never used it before, it's not completely intuitive. It's much easier to learn if you don't think of it like a pen. And if you've never used it before, expect a little bit of a learning curve. It takes a little while to get proficient with it, just because it's an unusual tool. So basically, this is the gist of how the pen tool works. You click, you create points. You can connect those points, and then your shapes can have a fill color. I'm going to set this fill color to blue just for this demonstration. And they can have a stroke color, which is an outline. I'm going to set this to red for this demonstration. Alright, I am going to make my stroke here 6 points so that we can see it easily. Alright, so this is an example of a closed shape with a fill and a stroke. We can also do an open shape. Okay, that shape is not closed. The one end point is here, the other end point is here. Because I've applied a fill, it sort of cuts across. It fills in and cuts across what it can. If I remove the fill, you'll see it's like this. I have a stroke that does not connect itself. Alright. Those are really the basics of using the pen tool. It's just a sort of connect the dots. Now, the way that we make curves with the pen tool, we go to our pen tool, hold it down, we go to our anchor point tool. We can then click on these anchor points and pull out curve control handles. Okay? These control the curves. It is relatively simple. We can, with our black selection tool, which is an object selection tool, we can select an entire object. If we deselect it and we go to our white arrow, we can select individual points or individual control handles. Okay, so this is by adjusting how far our curve handles go out and the angle, we can control the shapes of our curves. We have a lot of control over the shapes of our curves. It is a little bit of a tough thing to get used to at first because you're not directly controlling them. It's more like It's more like a puppeteer controlling a marionette with strings. Like you are adjusting this, and it changes the shape of that. All right. These curve control handles default to being on a tangent to the curve, and the 2 points being staying in a tangential line to each other, meaning that, as you can see, if I pull this handle down, that one goes up. Now, we don't have to work with that. We can go back to our anchor point tool, and I can grab this handle and break it free of that. So there, now we have a sharp corner with 2 curves. Okay, I'm going to do that again down here. I'm going to use this curve control, give that a sharp corner. So now my shape is looking more like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle or something. All right. This is how you can draw and affect curves with the pen tool. Now there is a little bit more of a direct way to do it if you're drawing a shape with the pen tool. If you click and hold down without letting go, you can pull out control handles. Click, hold down. So this is a way to draw and get the curves you want as you go. Alright, so that is the very, very basics of using the pen tool. I'm going to show you 3 different techniques for actually drawing letters. Essentially what you're going to do is you're going to trace over your drawing. Now, you do not... Somebody may already know something about Illustrator, and you may have the bright idea of, why don't I just use Illustrator's auto trace features? Well, it doesn't always give the best results, and I'm going to demonstrate why. So I'm going to copy my scan down here for a moment, just so that I can show you why I don't want you to use auto trace. If you go to Object, Image Trace, it's not called auto trace, Image Trace. If I make this auto trace and expand it, alright, that's what I get. It converts every imperfection in my drawing. Now, if we look at my drawing, okay, yeah, it is a little wobbly in places, there's some parts where it's white, but that wasn't my intention. My intention was to have straight solid lines, sharp corners. Auto trace went in and made it just reproduced all of the errors without actually doing a very good job of reproducing what I wanted. So, and if I go in here and look at the shapes, there are tons and tons and tons of points here. Now I could clean this up to be what I wanted, but it's going to be more work than just drawing it. So your whole point with this project is to take your drawing and with digital tools improve upon it, make something that you couldn't just do with a marker on marker paper. So you want to do yourself one better here. And you can see, looking at this sketch, well, things are leaning a little bit. I didn't really want things to be at an angle. I wanted things to be very upright. I have some wavery lines. It's just a result of me not being able to draw perfectly. I have these little white spots in here. That's obviously not what I want. So the first technique, which I'm going to look at this sort of 6-sided geometric concept, is to use basic geometric shapes and build them up. So I'm going to use my rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw over the stem of this N. Now, I have a little problem. Drawing this rectangle has obscured the drawing underneath. I'm drawing on my art layer. I can hide the art layer and see what's underneath. I could hide the scan layer, only see my drawing. But what I can't, well, I want to see how this compares to my drawing underneath. So this is a technique I like to use. I give the shapes I'm drawing no fill, so they are transparent, and I give them a pink stroke or a magenta stroke. So this way I know that's the line of the shape I've drawn, but I can see through. So you may find that useful. And I just use pink because, I don't know, it's very easy to see against the black and white art. So that's good. Now that I can see, I can make this kind of the width I want. Now my whole, all four letters here are very, very geometric in the sense that they're just made out of rectangles and lines of the same shape and angle. So I can just, once I've got the stem, I can copy and paste it and use it for all of my verticals. I can use it here, I can use it here, 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 and here. So, just like any piece of software, you can go to Edit, you can go to Copy, and you can go to Paste, and you get a copy, and it sort of puts it down in a random location, and you can work like that. However, Illustrator has a much nicer way to copy things. If you hold down the Option key, if you have an object selected and hold down Option, you may see now that my cursor gets doubled. I get that sort of second arrow there. That means it's going to copy. And if I hold down Shift as I do this, so I have Shift and Option held down, it makes a cursor and it makes a copy and constrains it horizontally. So I can pull it out horizontally. I know it's not wavering up and down. I'm just making a perfect copy of this and bringing it out horizontally. And that can be the right-hand side of my N. And I can grab the top of this rectangle and shrink it down a little bit. Okay? And that's working pretty well for me. I can, again, copy this shape, bring it up here. For here, I want a rotated angle. So I can go to my rotation tool, and I can just rotate this to how I want it. Now, if you hold down Shift with this, it will constrain to increments of 45 degrees, which is not exactly what I wanted. I actually drew this to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 30, 35 degrees. If you can just eyeball it like I'm doing and say, yeah, that looks about right to me. Or if you want to be more precise about it, you can double click on the rotate tool and do, say I wanted 35 degrees exactly. You can do it that way. So I'm bringing this down here. I'm going to adjust the height to be the height that I want. That's looking pretty good. That looks about right to me. And I need one more here. Now, if I back out a little bit, done this thing. I've started zooming and moving around without telling you guys how. Alright, if you go to the magnifying glass down here, you can zoom in, or if you hold down Option, that changes it to zoom out. Alright, that is one way to zoom in or out. And when you're in the magnification tool, just your mouse will just move the artboard around. Another is View. You can go to zoom in, zoom out here. I like to use the arrow keys. So Command plus zooms in, Command minus zooms out. And then no matter which tool you have selected, if you hold down the space bar, the space on your keyboard, it turns into this hand and you can move your artboard around. Alright, so I find that useful. There's also two other keys that are super useful if you do Command 0. That zooms so that your entire document, your entire artboard is visible on the screen. No matter how large your screen is, no matter how large your artboard is, it just zooms so the whole thing is visible. So if I had a huge poster, this might zoom to like 20% to show the whole thing. If I were working on a little business card and I did Command 0, it would probably zoom to like 300% to show the whole thing. And then Command 1 zooms to 100% size. This is very useful. It's very easy when you're working digitally to be super in here at like 400, 500% scale and start working on a little detail that, lo and behold, when you print it out actual size at 100%, you can't see it all. So it's very useful sometimes to just back out to 100% size, look at it at actual size, and see what is going on. The other one I find useful is Command : toggles showing or hiding your guidelines. Sometimes you want to look at it without the guidelines. Okay? Now, we notice here, this left-leaning diagonal on my N is fairly thick. It's about the same here. On my A, at the bottom one, it's very thick. Up here, it's thinner. All right, and here, it's just like a line. So this is something that I've drawn but didn't really think it out that well in my drawing. I might want to try to make this a little bit more consistent. And probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose two widths. I'm going to choose a thick one and maybe a hairline one. All right. So I'm going to copy this. Whoops. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to rotate it the opposite direction. I'm going to bring it over here, scale it to how I want it, but then I'm going to compare to there. That's about right. That's about right for there. I drew this a little thicker, but I think I want to make it about the same here. Maybe this one should be thinner. Maybe I want to make the top here thicker and the bottom, my sort of finial stroke here, the hairline. So this is a good point for all of you, that your job with part 2 of this project, it's not to reproduce your drawing exactly. The drawing was a conceptual tool to help you get ideas down, to help you refine your ideas. Now that you are working with digital tools, you can refine the ideas more. So, please feel free to update and make these better. Alright, so this is the technique I'm using for these letters. I'm drawing these as parts. Once I've drawn them, I can actually copy them and reproduce them fairly easily. So this looks very similar to the top of my A. Right? Here I can drag this down, make this the bottom of my A. Drag a copy down here to make this the bottom of my A. I may not want it quite so thick here. A lot of times with this project, it's very easy to get sort of perfectly geometrically precise and then somehow lose what was cool about your hand drawing. So if you ever find yourself in that situation where you're like, well, I made all these parts exactly right, exactly the same in the computer, and I've lost what I loved about my drawing. Well, go back to the drawing. A lot of times in design, it's not about being perfect. It's about what looks good. And you want to make what looks good look as perfectly good as you can, but you know, don't let math trump your creativity. All right, so I'm using these parts to draw it. I can also go in, I can move individual points to suit what I want. Now, how do I go from these pink outlined squares to the actual letters? You can select the letter, you can change the stroke to none, and you can change the fill to black. And suddenly it looks a whole lot more like a letter. Huh? And do that again here. No outline, black fill. Oh wow, that is looking a lot more real. I can hide my scan. Alright, it's looking a lot more like what I imagined. And this is a pretty good way to work. You use the scan to set it up, and then once you have things set up digitally, then you can hide the scan and improve some more. Alright, so these letters will probably work pretty well just like this, just as collections of rectangles, but you know, you may find that you want to actually combine them in places. So here's an example with the O. I have the left-hand side of my O. I want to actually tweak my angle a little bit because I don't want my angle to be quite as steep here. This is another example of sort of going with what looks good over exact mathematics. So now I have this that is the sort of top of my O. I can select all of them, copy and paste them. I'll get a copy like this, and I can go down here and that is the other side of my O. Alright, now I've got some weirdness here. I want to make this longer. This side shorter. I want to make this longer, yada yada yada. Now, what if I want to make each of these sides one piece? I don't want to select all three. I'm going to show you the Pathfinder tool. The window, Pathfinder, you get the Pathfinder palette. And this has all these shape modes. I go into this quite a bit in my Illustrator skills tutorial videos. Right now I'm just going to show you the shape mode. So I have this selected. I'm holding down Shift to select multiple items, and I go to my shape mode. Combine. The combine will combine all three of them into one shape. Alright. So now if I go to my outline mode, View Outline, this just shows the outlines of shapes. You can see the N is made up of 4 rectangles, the A is made up of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. My O is just made out of 2 more complex shapes. Alright, so you may find this Pathfinder tool very useful. View Preview to go back there. Alright, So that is drawing geometric shapes and using the Pathfinder tool. That technique may work very well if you have a very blocky font, you have something that's made up of a bunch of rectangles or circles or something like that. Something that looks very modular. You may find that useful. I'm going to show you some other techniques now for some other types of letters that you may find useful if you have different types of letters. So I'm just going to move this scan off of the artboard. I'm going to place another scan. Okay, so this concept is much more of a linear type idea. All right, I have these sort of rounded letters, and they kind of have breaks in them for stencil cuts. So for a design like this, you may find it very useful to draw the skeletal shape. So I'm going to go to the pen tool, I'm going to give myself no fill, and I'm going to give myself a pink stroke. And I'm going to draw the central skeletal shape of these letters. So this is a lot like our project 1. You're just drawing the skeleton, the central skeleton. All right. When you have, actually I should show the problem. Many people have this problem when they're first starting to use Illustrator. I've drawn this shape, now I want to start over here, and it's just doing one continuous line. I don't want that. I want a new line over here. So there's two ways to break the line. One is to go over here, go to the solid arrow tool. That tells you want a new thing. Ta-da. The other, and then you go back to the pen tool to draw a new one. The other is, it wants to do a new one, but then if you hold down Option, you'll see it changes to that. And so Option and click will start a new line. Okay. So I'm going to do my N with this skeletal technique. I'm going to draw it in two parts. Option. Okay, so I have these two sort of central skeletal lines drawn. It's as if I'm drawing the center line of my letters. How in the world does this help me? Well, first of all, I can just go into my stroke palette, which is this one, stroke, or window, stroke, window, stroke. It defaults to just being about the stroke weight, which is how thick your line is. If I go to, let me see, 10 pixels or 10 points, seems a little heavy. 8 might be good for this. Now if I go over here and do show options, we get a lot more options here. So it defaults to having a cap. The cap is the end of your stroke, what the end of your stroke looks like. The default is what they call a butt cap, meaning it abuts to the end of your stroke. There's also a round cap, which does a radius around that last point. And then there's also a projecting cap, which projects out by as far as the stroke is wide. For this design, I want the round cap. That's like perfect. Look at that. You also have different kinds of joins. So if, for example, this I drew a curve in here, but let me actually take that away. You have these delete anchor point tools. So I'm going to use the delete anchor point tool to actually make this a sharp, hard corner. All right, so that's my line now. I have this sharp corner here, which is not quite what I drew. I can go to the corner tool and do a round join. Hey, look at that. It looks a lot like what I was drawing. So I'm going to do the same thing here. What did I have? 8 points. 8 points. Round cap. Okay. Now, you may notice there's this weird little lumpiness to this line. I would just like a nice round curve. I'm going to first show you the mistake a lot of students make. They're like, this curve is not what I want. And they go in and they add another point, and maybe another one. And then you end up with a big mess because you're trying to adjust this, and you're trying to adjust this, and what happened? All right. The thing is, it seems like a very natural thing to do. You want more control, you add more points. That's not actually a great way to work with vectors. Usually you want the bare minimum of points that you can possibly get away with, honestly. You want as few points as possible. That makes a much better vector drawing. So now I have, I'm actually going to take this one away too and go to a sharp corner. So now I only have 3 points here. I have this point, this point. Oh, do I have a fourth? No, I don't. And this point. And I can actually give this a round corner, and it's kind of what I want, but it's not really what I drew. If we go to that, I have a lot more of a curve here. So I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to add a point, 1 point back in. Right, adding a point there. And I'm going to go to my anchor point tool and bring up anchor points. And bring up anchor points this way. Now, if you get, so this is one thing that can happen. The control handles can be going the wrong way, and you get this sort of, if that happens, you just want to go the other way with them. All right, that's one thing. Another is if you get a sort of a crossover where one point has extended beyond where it would cross over the other control handle, then you get some funny things happen. You basically don't want to have either control handle crossing over each other. All right. Page 4 of your project brief lists a lot of best practices for working with Bezier curves. That's a good thing to take a quick look at, just because they can kind of help you get better looking curves when you're drawing curves. Okay. So again, this takes practice. It isn't always very intuitive, but with practice you can learn to control these curves, control your curves better. All right, so there, I've done that. And I have my central line. I might go a point bigger, make it 9 points. All right, I can do that. Now, let's say for my O. I want to actually start with an oval. I'm going to rotate my oval a little bit so that I've got the angle that I want, and bring it down to the size that I want. Right, so that's about the size and shape of the O that I drew. So I want to use that, but I want to put in these cuts. I have these cuts for the stencil style. So it's a stencil style with sort of rounded points. How do I do this? Okay. You go under the eraser tool. Buried under the eraser tool is a scissors tool. The scissors tool, if you click on a shape, it cuts it. You need to do it in two places because really, if you just do it once, it's still essentially a closed shape. But you do it here, and suddenly I have two shapes. All right, so I've now cut this in half. If I drag this up here, you can see I have the top half and the bottom half. Now, it still isn't exactly what I want because I want some space in between, so I'm going to use the scissors tool some more and cut away sections that I didn't want. And I can go in here and I can select these sections and just delete them. And that's how I have put in stencil cuts. All right, and now I can take these and tweak them a little bit to look a little bit more like my drawing if I like. But all of this is working with a central line technique. So this is a very good technique if you have what we call a sort of mono-weight font, meaning that it just looks like one line that doesn't change width at all. Now you may run into a problem with this. You may have an area where you've drawn something and this line doesn't cooperate exactly. So let's say I didn't want actually the top of my N to be to have this sharp corner on the inside. Let's say, oops. Let's say instead of the sharp corner, I wanted a little curve in here. Now this is just not going to happen with this monoline technique. The round join only really affects the outside. It still gives me a sharp corner here. There's nothing I can do with that, keeping it as a line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into an outline. Object, path, outline stroke. Now I don't know why it did away with my okay. Object path, outline stroke, and now what has happened if it looks exactly the same at first, right? Here's our center line with a stroke, we see the center line. This looks exactly the same, but what it has done is drawn the outline. Okay? So this means that I can now go in here and I can tweak individual points and I can get the curve that I want. So I want in here and turned that curve to be what I want. Now the problem with this is that if I want to make it thicker, it's not as easy as it was with this. But that is a good technique if you want to individually control parts of your otherwise monoline font. All right, so that is the central skeletal strokes and the stroke palette. I'm going to move on to my third concept drawing, which looked sort of quasi-calligraphic. It had some thicks and thins. Now, just to, repeat myself endlessly and beat a dead horse, you only need to do the one concept. You just choose your favorite marker drawing concept. You're just going to execute one. I'm showing you three because I want to show you different techniques. All right, so this is the third one. This technique, I'm going to start with that. So this is a very calligraphic look. Has these sort of curly swashes. Has these ball terminals. Maybe I'll work on the M instead of the, or maybe I'll work on the E loopiness. The other thing this has is a variation of thick and thin lines. All right, so I'm going to start with my pen tool. I am going to draw my crossbar of my E, give it a little bit of a curve. I'm going to draw this part of my E. Oh, and it's filling in black because I have a black fill selected and no stroke. And see, this is the problem. This is why I recommend you work with a brightly colored stroke and no fill. Because otherwise, if you work with a fill on, it starts filling in. Okay, so I've drawn my shape. I'm going to give it no fill, and I'm going to give it a black stroke. So now I've drawn this center line. I am going to refine my curves a little bit because they look a little bit lumpy. And I don't want them to be lumpy, I want them to be beautiful. I'm going to take away that extra point. This is on the handout, but it's really good. It will give you better curves if you try to keep your curves at our 4 cardinal directions. So, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whenever possible. It's not always possible, depending on what you're drawing, but when possible, it's a real help. It really makes things look better if you can do that. It also helps if you have your curve anchor points on somewhat equal on both sides of a curve. So what you don't want is you don't want a situation like this where you have this huge anchor point here and then much smaller on the other side. If you try to make them as equal as your design allows, you'll generally get better looking shapes. Okay. and here. This is sort of getting super exaggerated. Okay. So this is, I've sort of drawn the skeletal shape of my E. Make this pink. Make it easier to see. I've drawn the skeletal shape of my E, but a big part of this design is that we have these thicks and thins. So my 1-point thick skeletal line doesn't really cut it for this design. So I'm going to show you how to use the width tool. The width tool is really great for any design like this that looks sort of calligraphic. Okay, so the width tool is this tool. It looks a little bit, to me, it looks like a snake with robot arms. It might not look like that to you, but that's what it looks like to me. And what this does, this allows you to touch any line, any drawn line, and pull out widths, or pull in a width. So I want this fairly narrow at the top, I want it fairly wide at the sides. I want this fairly wide here. I want this narrower here, because this is going to come to a very fine point. All right, and what this does, this allows you to have these variations of thick and thin in your drawing. And what's really nice about it, if we go to preview mode, it's still a single line. So we can change the shape of our line. It will preserve the thick and thin while allowing us to simply redraw our center line. So it's sort of best of both worlds. Now, it doesn't always do exactly what you want it to do. Like, for example, here I sort of want this to go up and be a corner. It's not really doing that. It's sort of making this round balloon. But this is really good for kind of getting part of the way there. If you have a design that is somewhat calligraphic, this can kind of get you part of the way there. And then you can do the same thing. You can do object, path, outline, stroke. And then from here, I can go in and I can do away with the points that I don't need with the delete anchor point tool. You know, I don't need these. I just need a few. I want a sharp corner here. Okay, so width tool, super useful if you want nice variations of thick and thin. And very often keeping your letters broken up into its sort of component shapes, a lot like our calligraphy, will help you. Now, if you stop and think about it, I've kind of used a combination of techniques here. I've used a skeletal technique at first. I used the width tool, then I outlined it, and I'm altering the path with just the pen tool. You may use all of these techniques in whatever combination you want. Basically, this is all just here to help you. So you don't need to be married to any single technique. Something's not working for you, try something else. All right. So what you're going to do, you're going to draw all 4 letters. I recommend that you work with the pink outline, but when you get to the point where you've got what you want, then switch it to a black fill. You want to make your letters black. All right, so that is the end of part 2. Part 3, I'm going to talk to you about actually proofing stuff, printing it, and then creating the words you need to create.